Jesus has prayed for his disciples. He's prayed that they be holy. He prays that they be united one with another. But he leaves with a heavy heart. Judas has betrayed, is betraying. He knows that Peter is going to collapse. The troops will come and he'll be bound up, chained. The high priest will excommunicate him and demand that he be killed. And then there'll be this extraordinary encounter with Pilate. On one side, Pilate is a fragile, weak man, frightened, and yet he's touched by Jesus. What I'm asking you today is, as you contemplate the passion of Jesus, the pain of Jesus, Jesus with the crown of thorns, Jesus imprisoned, can I ask you to contemplate all those today who are crucified, who are being in pain? We cannot separate the pain of Jesus from the pain of the world, because today there are so many people in chains, so many people who are hurt, pushed aside. Their dignity is not respected. So many from their conception to their death have been pushed aside. So many today are refugees. So many today are in prisons, killed, put aside, genocides. And so here we're confronted by power that crushes weakness. Here we're in this sort of fundamental mystery of humanity. But I'm going to ask you also something else. It's to reflect. The seeds of Judas are in me, are in you. We can be angry with love. We can be angry with Jesus. There's the seeds of Peter, who's a very human man, but he doesn't accept the mystery of the gospel message of forgiveness, of littleness, of humility. He can't accept that. And I ask you to also see in yourself Pilate, frightened of losing his job if he follows his conscience. Also, that the seeds of the leaders of the religious Jews, they're in us, their fear of change. Where are we frightened of change? And then there is Jesus, meek and humble of heart, serene. So Jesus goes to the garden, that garden he loves, that garden he had been so many times to, Garden of Olives, that is called Gethsemane, just outside of Jerusalem, a place that he knew and a place that he loved and a place that he rested in. Judas knew about it. And you see the high priests, the religious authorities, they know that they cannot arrest Jesus during daytime. There would be a revolution. They can't do it. So where is he during the night so as we can take him? And that's where, unfortunately, Judas steps in. I will lead you to him. So Jesus is there in the garden, and then a tumultuous sound, a company of Roman troops and the troops of the temple, torches, weapons, metal against metal, and they start arriving, and you could hear them talking, shouting, and so on. And Jesus hears them coming. He goes out of the garden and confronts them. He doesn't want the disciples to be with him. He's alone. He doesn't want the disciples to be arrested. And so he just looks at them and with all the dignity of the Word made flesh and just says, who are you looking for? Remember, at the beginning of the gospel, the first words of Jesus, what are you looking for? Now it's, who are you looking for? Jesus the Nazarene, I am. The word or the name of God, filled with awe. And the gospel says that these men, these troops with their torches and weapons sort of stand back as if in awe. And so they approach him, and Peter takes out a sword and he starts to pretend to fight. He chops off the ear of the slave of the high priest. Not a very brave act. Jesus says, put your sword away. Am I not to drink the cup my Father gives me? Jesus is defenseless. Jesus is the one of non-violence. And so Jesus is in this sense of defenselessness. And when he says, "Am I not to drink the cup the Father gives me?" that word cup means on one side the cup of pain. Am I not called to drink the cup of pain? But it's also the cup of love. It's the cup of communion, because he is in relationship, in love, in communion with the Father. And he's saying that this is the hour, and he knows the Father is with him. So Jesus, tied up with ropes, is led by the soldiers, the temple police, for a trial. The Gospel doesn't talk about this trial, or just a word, because John considers it a false trial. But they question him, and Jesus just says, "But I have spoken openly in the temple and in the synagogues." There's no secret plot. Jesus is speaking openly to everybody. And then Jesus is taken to Caiaphas, and another trial will be started. And Peter is there, sitting round a fire. And here we have a very sad reality of what is going to happen. The rock is going to break. 3 times women come up to him and say, "You're one of his disciples." "I am not." 3 times. "I am not. I am not." That "I am not," it's as if he doesn't exist anymore in some way. He's lost his identity. How is it that Peter, the rock, the leader, is able to say, "I am not his disciple"? I don't know him. It's very important to try and understand what has happened to Peter. Is it fear? I don't believe that Peter is a man of fear. I think it's something much deeper. I think that emotionally he collapses. You see, he has a vision of Jesus. Jesus the powerful one, Jesus the victorious king, Jesus the one who's done miracles, Jesus the one who rose Lazarus from the dead. And here he is, silent, not defending himself. Peter doesn't know that side of Jesus. In a way, he doesn't know the more vulnerable Jesus. But he shouts out, "I do not know him. I do not. I am not." The mystery behind that is he had an idea of Jesus. Do we have an idea of Jesus? Or do we want to know the real Jesus? And the real Jesus is the fragile, vulnerable Jesus, the Jesus who weeps, the Jesus who is tired, the Jesus who's thrown into prison, the Jesus who's bullied and spat at. That is the real Jesus. And in some way that real Jesus is being identified to all those that are bullied in our world today. You see, all of us maybe at one time we have an ideal, an ideology. Maybe people go into marriage like that. An ideal, a beautiful ideal. And then 5, 10, 15 years later, they touch reality. Reality can be painful. To live with someone with whom there is no more communication, there is pain. So it's that movement from the ideal to the reality. And reality is pain. Reality is people. Reality is people who have conflicts, who have difficulties one with another. And here, that's where Peter breaks down. It's the movement from the ideology, the ideal, to reality. Can we discover that God is hidden in reality? The ideology is in my head. It's an imagination. It isn't real. And when people get married, they're called to meet the real person. When they go to the church, to discover the real church, which is beautiful but painful. Communities of l'Arche, beautiful but painful. And that Peter can't stand. He has to learn that God is hidden in the brokenness of the world. And so Peter, he breaks down. Do we sometimes break down because we can't make that passage from the ideal to the real? You see, some people are bound up or chained in ideology and certitudes. They refuse change, and yet growth is change. The evolution of the world is change. The mystery of church is change. The whole mystery of humanity is change. But we can be bound up. We can be bound up with our own ideas. We can be bound up with our own compulsions of a need for success. And then we're not able to see the reality. We can be bound up, I'm going to say something strange, thinking that we are God. You see, you and I, we are tiny little bits of this universe. I was born, what was it, 70 or 73, 5 years ago. In a few years, I will no longer be here. Humanity has been going on for millions of years, and it'll go on for time. We are just tiny, tiny realities in this world. We are just a little part of an immense whole. But we pretend to think we are the whole. We're not. We were born and we will die. And so we can get tied up in ourselves as if we are the whole, and we're not. We're just this little particle in a huge reality of the whole of the evolution of humanity and the whole of humanity today. Now we see Pilate in the praetorium with Jesus, face to face. Pilate has informers. He knows what is going on. And he knows that a few days earlier, all the crowd were there with palm trees, screaming, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, the King of Israel." So he knows what people are saying about Jesus. And Pilate looks at him and says, "Are you the King of the Jews?" Jesus just answers, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom was of this world, my followers would have come and I would not have been delivered into the hands of the Jewish authorities." So you are king? You have said it. I was born and I came into the world to testify to the truth. Here, for the first time, Jesus is assuming, claiming that he is king. It seems quite clear that Pilate knows that Jesus is not a threat to the empire. His informers have told him clearly that Jesus talks about peace, that Jesus is the poor. There are no army, no armaments. So he senses an innocence in Jesus. So Pilate goes out and says to the high priest, the religious authorities, "I see no case against him." Probably what's going on inside of Pilate's mind, Jesus is a dreamer, a strange mystic, a little bit off his head. He's no danger to anyone. But in some way, to placate the Jewish authorities, he sends Jesus to be scourged, to be flogged. There we have a very painful scene where Jesus is laughed at, spat at by the soldiers, probably men who are a little bit sadistic. And so they make a crown made of thorns and they put it on his head. You can imagine the pain and you can see almost the blood coming down the face of, and they put a purple cloak around him. The purple was the kingly robe. And they kneel in front of him and say, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they laugh at him and spit at him. We then see Jesus and Pilate again, except Jesus now has these thorns on his head. Blood is coming down the face, and his back has been flogged. How many times was it? 30 or 60 times. And these floggings, these whips, they had little pieces of metal in them. And so when the whip went into the skin, it rips out the skin. And so here we have Jesus with blood, this purple robe. And Pilate brings Jesus out in front of the Jewish people. Here is the man. Crucify him, crucify him. And then answers the Jewish authorities, we have a law that somebody who claims that he is the Son of God should be killed. So Pilate becomes a little bit frightened. What is this? This incredible man filled with peace, who doesn't say anything. Could he have some magical, spiritual power that might harm him, his wife, or his children? So somewhere there's a fear within him. And he looks at Jesus and says, where are you from? Jesus knows that he's from God and is going to God. And he can't say that. So he remains silent. The silences of Jesus are always important. Don't you know that I have the power to liberate you or to have you crucified? That I have a power over you? You would have no power except the power that my Father gives you. And those who have delivered me to you, they are even in greater error. And then we hear the Jews crying out again, the Jewish authorities crying out again, if you release this man, then you're going against the emperor. Because anyone who makes himself or calls himself king is going against the emperor. So you see there, that's where Pilate is very fragile. He knows that if the Jewish authorities denounce him to Rome, he will be in serious trouble. He does not want trouble. So Pilate becomes frightened, and frightened of being denounced. And so he comes out in front of the religious authorities, and in a sort of mocking way, here is your king. And I say, comes from a despisal of the Jewish people, because that is the sort of king they should have. Crucify him, crucify him. If you don't crucify him, you're not a friend of the emperor. And so the inevitable happens. Pilate gives Jesus over to be crucified. Here we have the Word made flesh, handed over to be assassinated and killed. The Word made flesh is silent. The hatred is violent. And here we have the truth clothed in peace, because Jesus in the Gospel of John is deeply at peace. He knows that it is his hour, and he knows that it'll be in this hour he'll be liberated. The one that is chained is the King of love. The King who is in chains is the King of love, and he has come to break the chains that prevent us from becoming men and women standing up, men and women of compassion, men and women who are free to love people and work for peace. So Pilate handed Jesus over to the Jewish religious authorities to be crucified. Jesus is silent. I am is silent. he says nothing. And so frequently, truth is silent. So often those who speak out the truth are silenced. And the truth in each one of us can also sometimes be silenced. You see, in each of us, there is the King, which is our conscience, which governs our lives and permits us to make choices. And sometimes this inner light, this conscience, that which is deepest in us, which is also the King of love which is in me, we can push it away. Even we can put it to be crucified by other people because we are frightened. We're frightened of speaking the truth. We're frightened of change. We're frightened of loving people. But Jesus came to liberate our chains so that we become men and women who are free, free to love and free to speak the truth.